Thanks so much, Marjorie, for letting us know you're here with your granddaughter. Great to see an intergenerational crowd and other family relations. Phyllis's brother.
Good
Hello,
morning.
Brooklyn, Washington, Chicago, Vancouver, Asheville, San Diego. Great. So I'm going to get started. Thank you to Samantha Zellman, Shomer Collective's Director of Partnerships and Programs, for continuing to let people in from the waiting room and handling all the tech behind the scenes. My name is Rabbi Melanie Lavav. I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of Shomer Collective. We are so excited to be here with you today with our special guests, Rabbi Zac and Mati, and I'm going to give a little bit of background and introduction before we get to the heart of the matter. So we invite you to share in the chat where you're joining us from today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Shomer Collective, because I know a number of you are new to our work. We're so excited to see so many folks from Shefa joining us. Great to be in partnership with the good folks at Shefa. So Shomer Collective launched in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. We are a startup, nonprofit, working to improve end-of-life care and conversations guided by Jewish wisdom, knowing that so many of us have had experiences with the deaths of people we know and love that we wish would have been different, or we wish to emulate because it was something that taught us about how we want to live our lives. And we know that there is a wealth of Jewish wisdom to help guide us on these questions of how we live well in the face of mortality. Shomer's work is focused both on individuals and families and on professionals and organizations, really working to bring the conversation about death and dying back into the Jewish communal square, so that we normalize conversations about death and dying early and often, reducing some of the fear that we have in talking about hard things, supported by Jewish wisdom that reminds us it's important to talk about hard things. So today's session, you should feel free to chat any questions at any time to us collectively. I will facilitate a question and answer period toward the end of our time together today, but I'll be collecting them and monitoring the chat throughout. If you want to ask a question without your name associated, you can chat me privately, and I won't say your name when I give voice to your question. As we're anticipating such a large group, we'll reduce the number of people who are speaking. I want to note that today is the first time, and very likely not the last time, that Shomer Collective is engaging publicly with this topic, with questions around Jewish wisdom as it relates to expanded consciousness, use of psychedelics, and how these ideas of expanded consciousness and psychedelic medicine can support the work of helping people to live well as we journey from life toward the end of life as we know it. Today is designed to offer us a snapshot of Jewish wisdom about psychedelics, a bit of background about what psychedelics are, and about the potential for psychedelics to support and enhance end-of-life care by practitioners who have done some of this work. We are thrilled to be getting this conversation started here in partnership with our friends at Shefa. I also want to honor the many professionals who have joined us today, who are in this space, who bring with you your expertise in supporting other folks around the use of psychedelics and or expertise in supporting people around end-of-life experiences. If that's you, if you're a professional and we haven't yet connected, please feel free to share your information in the chat. We'll collect that and add you to our growing directory of folks doing this work. I want to offer a couple of minutes of Jewish grounding to get us started and to help orient us within Jewish time and space. Before I do that, I invite you to share in the chat to give thought to what brought you to this session today, right? We didn't tell you all that much in the description. We ourselves have had a number of conversations about what might happen today, and we're all in it for the first time in this space, seeing where we will be going. What was it in particular that drew you to this session today? Perhaps it's your experience, your curiosity, you heard about it from a friend. Feel free to share that in the chat. And so a piece of Jewish wisdom to orient ourselves within Jewish time and space. If we look in the rear view mirror, we can still see the fading images of Purim, the merrymaking, the upside downness, the story in the book of Esther, saving of the Jewish people. And if we look ahead, we can start to see Passover coming into view. I don't know about you, but I've started to stock up on some of the food supplies that my family prefers that often are out of stock by the time the holiday rolls around. Next week, we will welcome the Hebrew month of Nisan on the Jewish calendar, and that's the month in which we celebrate Passover. We celebrate it at the midpoint in the month. If Passover, holiday of freedom, can be simplified as a journey through narrow places, through constriction, toward expansiveness from the things that constrain us, moving into the space in which all is possible, then perhaps we can understand a bit about how the Jewish mystics got into the idea of expanded consciousness, how a Jewish exploration of expanded consciousness that's accessible through the use of psychedelic medicine is worthy of exploration. And yet, why are we at Shomer Collective, an organization focused on end of life, doing this session? We're doing it because of the ways in which our work is focused, as I said, on living well in the face of mortality, inspired by, guided by Jewish wisdom. If it is human to experience the fear of death, and the rabbis most certainly acknowledged those fears of death in the Jewish wisdom that we've inherited, and if expanded consciousness might help some folks to move through and beyond that fear, as it is being written about by researchers about the use of psychedelic medicine to support end-of-life care, then we're interested in bringing together that growing scientific knowledge and life experience among the folks in our conversation today with the rich wisdom of our tradition. And so it is my privilege to bring to our conversation today Rabbi Zac Kamenetz and Mati Esther Engel, who will each share with us about their backgrounds, their approach to this work, and then we'll engage in a conversation to be followed by questions and answers. So again, feel free to send your questions to us in the chat. Samantha's going to put their full formal bios in the chat, but in short, Mati comes to us as a self-identified spiritual care practitioner and integration guide who is helping people to confront their mortality with the use of psychedelics. And Zac is the founder of Shefa, a new-ish Jewish organization, not unlike Shomer Collective, really leading the way in Jewish explorations and psychedelics. So I'm going to hand it over to Zac, who will expand on introducing yourself and get us started. Thanks, Zac.
Thank you, Reb Melanie, and welcome everyone. It's such an honor to be here and be part of what you are growing for all of us. So my name is Rabbi Zac Kamenetz. As Melanie said, I am the founder and CEO of Shefa, the first organization that is dedicated to Jewish psychedelic support. And you can look on our website, shefaflow.org, to see how we are doing that in this current moment and where we're going to be going in the near future. I came to psychedelic work in 2017, but before that, I would say that I had a natural mystic tendency that brought me to the rabbinate. It brought me to Jewish practice and observance. And it was that kind of natural mysticism that when I was a young person and had this profound experience, almost this instant trance state where I knew that divinity was real, I had a relationship with it. And the way that we navigated that relationship together was through mitzvot and learning Torah and the sense of love and compassion for all people and all things. That was, I think, the fertile ground for when psychedelics actually came into my life to start a new investigation. So I want to just present a few slides, and I also then just want to share quickly that Shefa, my organization, this is on advice of counsel, solely provides education and support around psychedelic experiences. In no manner does Shefa encourage, induce, or substantially assist a person to engage in illegal conduct, but acknowledges that Jewish people use sacred substances nevertheless. Nevertheless, Shefa believes that it is a spiritual obligation and that there is a religious imperative to provide Jewish context, support, and harm reduction services to all such sacred psychedelic experiences. This is important, even though we are speaking about this topic in public, that people know that psychedelic use and possession, regardless of the substance or setting, entails significant risks and are still federally scheduled. So just so that people are aware of that, this is a public conversation that is for the purpose of education, but Mati will also be speaking about some legal pathways that people are doing this work as well. So psychedelics, Judaism, and how I got here. It's a brief story, but I also wanted to make sure, everyone has probably read the Michael Pollan book. People are working with psychedelics or are in this space already, have seen the Netflix special, but I just want to make sure that people know what we're talking about if people are new to this. Psychedelics, meaning mind manifesting hallucinogens, are powerful psychoactive substances that alter perception and mood and affect numerous cognitive processes. These substances can occur naturally with an organic plant, fungal, and animal material, or be biomedically synthesized. So that is really what we're talking about. And I won't mention too much about this other term you might have heard, entheogen. It is another type of name. The history of naming these things is also very fascinating, but they seem to have more of not just mind manifesting or psychological implication, but something more about a experiential state where someone is connected with something larger than themselves, often called divinity or spirit. And when we talk about these substances, we're talking about a number of things. We're talking about some things that might be called classical psychedelics, like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, LSD, DMT. We're also speaking about MDMA. You might have seen more about MDMA in the news with regards to clinical trials that are being processed to get acceptance through the FDA to treat PTSD and other complex issues. And then there are also things that are called dissociatives, known as ketamine. We'll be speaking about ketamine in a bit, but also nitrous oxide. People have probably known about William James and his investigations with nitrous oxide in the turn of the century, the 20th century as well. And when we talk about psychedelic effects, what are we actually speaking about? We're speaking about perception, emotional states, and also cognition. And I'll be happy to share these slides with people, but just to know that we are speaking on different levels of experience, not just seeing visions, not just hearing sounds, but there are many other realms in which these various compounds and plants could affect a person. But a little bit about me. I was not psychedelically active until 2017, when I was part of a research study known as the Religious Leaders Study through the Johns Hopkins Psychedelic Research Unit. This is me here on the couch. I was part of this study with 24 other clergy, where I was given 2 high doses of psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, and had 2 6-hour journeys that was being supervised by 2 guides and also the lead researcher there. This study is about to be released in the next coming months. So this is going to be a fascinating investigation about what happens when religious leaders like myself, who are what they call psychedelically naive, having never done psychedelics before, what happens to our consciousness when we have this very vast library of reference of what happened in the spirit realm, or access to spiritual practices? What happens to my sense of being in relationship with other Jewish people as my vocation? I think the findings are going to be pretty dramatic and potentially shift how we think about religion and spirituality in this country. And just so you know, this is what it looks like to be in a session in this place. I've got the music, and here's a part of the playlist. You can find this on Spotify, but I have an eye mask, I have earphones and a blanket on me, and the invitation is for me to go inside myself, to go deeper and deeper into the realms of consciousness and to see what I find there and to be with whatever it is. After this experience, I was also given many, just like you'll have a survey at the end of this experience, I was given 4 times that. The survey experience, while I still have like a head full of psilocybin, I'm being asked to explain my experience, something like the mystical experience questionnaire that you see here, where people want to know, did I have an experience of pure being and pure awareness? What about an experience of eternity and infinity? All of these are trying to get at the qualitative and quantitative experience of what they call a mystical state. And then when we see that compared to different religious traditions and over time, how do we think about religiosity and whether it's catalyzed by something that is spontaneous or beautiful music or something that is being said that is so moving in a synagogue or a church versus taking a pill or eating some mushrooms? Are those things basically the same on paper? And if they are, what does that mean about being able to catalyze these experiences using an exogenous substance, something outside myself? But what I learned was that this psilocybin can indeed produce a mystical type experience. And I rated it as one of the top 5 experiences of my life. It radically shifted my sense of self-purpose and agency. And what I learned was that the container, right, the place where this was happening, the preparation helped my expectations for what might happen. The exploration that when people were either asking me how I was doing or the music that was being played for me, it really did change and determine my experience. So it's important to be aware of that. And then the integration, after this experience was over, the meaning making that happens afterwards, there were assumptions about what does it mean to make meaning? And the people who were, God bless them, the people in this clinical study were not Jewish, not rabbis, and they had their assumptions about what it means to make meaning, and I had mine. And so it helped me become aware that when we are dealing with a cultural framework or a spiritual framework like Jewishness or Judaism, it might be beneficial for Jews to be helping other Jewish people with that meaning-making process if they are desirous of it. So that is why we created Shefa, Jewish Psychedelic Support. We are here for integration support, meaning-making, either privately with myself or in small groups called integration circles. We are also here to, just like Melanie was speaking about being rooted in Jewish wisdom, there's this idea that the preparation, right, being able to set expectations, if we can help people learning their own mystical Jewish texts, learning their own foundational sources for what it means to be in the expanded consciousness, that might help people orient themselves toward their Jewish inwardness when they are reaching this inward place. And, after 2.5 years or so, we understand how critical this is for Jewish people around the world. So that's why we have created Shefa, creating powerful pathways to the heart of Jewish wisdom practice and community, inspired by contemporary psychedelic renaissance. So Jews and drugs, is this actually a thing? And it turns out that, forget whether there are drugs in the Torah. People always want to ask that question, and maybe that's already in the chat. I don't know about that. I'm a minimalist in this way, but we might actually have some evidence in this place called Tel Arad, which was discovered in 1962. It's right outside of Beersheba. And this was a garrison that was used by several different cultures and peoples, but the Israelite layer actually has a sanctuary. It has a mikdash me'at. It has a little tiny temple in it. And they were able to find here, constructed, this looks like in some ways the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem. And what they found in these incense stands here, right here in this little burned ash, they were never able to analyze it until 2020. And what they found was cannabis and frankincense in this place. And you can go and read this study. So if you are looking for your ancestors, my cannabis smokers, I'm not one of them, but maybe there are some on this call today. You have ancestors here that also found either the smell or the aroma, or even if there are some subjective effects, I don't even really know about that, that cannabis was being used by early Israelites in some way. Now, does that mean that the Kane Bosem, people are really excited about this, Kane Bosem that we find in the book of Exodus, when it says that Hashem, God, divinity, is telling Moshe to create the incense that is supposed to be used by Aaron, his brother, in the temple, where it says 500 weight of solidified myrrh, half as much, 250 of fragrant cinnamon, 250 of aromatic cane, kanebosem. And people since probably the early 1900s have said, yes, this is cannabis. Cannabis was used in the temple. There is ancient drug use in Israelite culture in the Torah. Again, I don't know about this. I think there's a lot of work that still has to be done. But I do think that there is a Jewish drug. And so did the rabbis. And that's called Torah. And this might be a way in. What does it mean to have Jewish drugs? Well, in the Gemara, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, what is the meaning of that which is written? And this is the Torah which Moshe placed, right? Vezot haTorah asher sam Moshe. We sing that in synagogue when we put when we lift up the Torahs, and that word asher sam, not only to place, but it also means drug. If he says, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, if one merits the Torah, it becomes a drug of life. But if one does not merit, it becomes for them a drug of death. This is, as Rava said, a later generation said, if one makes a craft of it, right, is really understanding what Torah can do, it is a drug of life. If one does not make a craft of it, it is a drug of death. And I think we see this in the world right now, where we see that Torah is being used in various ways to justify the actions of Jewish people in many realms, in many arenas, whether it's violence, whether it's social justice, etc. If you can use Torah as a drug of life, then this is something that can change the world. But we know that Torah can be used for nefarious purposes and can have deleterious effects. The same goes with psychedelics. So I think this is a really, really powerful model for the way that we start approaching psychedelic use, whether it's in therapy, whether it's for sacred application, for spiritual development. And just so that, we also have some ancestors as well, more modern than just the Israelites. Here we have early pictures of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, of blessed memory, Rabbi Art Green, who, thank God, is still with us and still creating amazing things. He's just putting out a Siddur based on his own interpretations of Jewish spirituality. And these were early investigations of what happens when these Jewish mystics that have heads full of Torah, what happens when they put psychedelics in and what comes out? Well, Reb Zalman produced a 50-page trip report about his LSD experience with Tim Leary. In the follow-up email, you'll be able to read Art Green's famous article that he wrote under a pseudonym about Kabbalah and psychedelics. So this is kind of an elite version when people who have a lot of knowledge, what happens when they are activated by psychedelics. I'm also more interested in what happens with people on the ground who don't have as much Torah knowledge. When Jewish people start taking this, what comes out and what comes through? We also have some detractors. We can share those teachings and ideas later. But we do have evidence of LSD therapy, most notably by Yechiel Danur. He was one of the people who testified against the Eichmann trial. He was one of the first people who was saved from Auschwitz to go undergo LSD therapy. And he wrote about this experience in this book called Shiviti, which is honestly just a trigger warning. It is powerful and terrible at the same time. So I'm out of time, but I just want to say that I do believe that we have Jewish frameworks for psychedelic experience. It's just about finding them. It is about embracing them in ways that most people, especially in liberal circles, have not been comfortable with mystical texts, either because they're inaccessible, because of their coded language, or there's problematics in the ways that they think about the world, other people, etc. But I want us to start opening up those places and making them our own. So maybe we'll have time to investigate that a little bit more. But I want to give the floor to Mati Engel to speak a little bit more, and then maybe we can get into some of the specifics about Jewish frameworks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Zac, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I am getting over a cold, so please be graceful with me, as I will be with myself as well. So a little bit about me. My background's actually as a chaplain. I was trained at Northwestern Hospital, where I dealt mostly with like trauma 1 patients. lots of also addiction, substance abuse. Then I moved over to Mount Sinai Hospital, completed a residency there, where again, I was dealing with mostly patients that were waiting transplant or didn't receive transplants. That overlapped with oncology, and I did some time with like the palliative care unit as well. And then most recently, I was in palliative care at Dartmouth in New Hampshire, where I was present for many deaths. And I would say mostly deaths that were not Jewish, which is also a part of my theology, and I'll speak to that momentarily. But what I found was there was almost like an absence of ritual or knowledge around what to do when somebody dies, or even how to prepare oneself to die. Out of the hundreds of patients that I've seen, I would say maybe 3 or 4 seemed ready, whatever that means, that there was some quality to them where I felt as though I was accompanying somebody who has already thought about what does it mean to confront these last days of my life. But they were really far and few between. And that was unsettling to me. It also put a lot of pressure on me as a practitioner to supply spirituality on demand, which is an interesting concept to talk about also when, being in healthcare and noticing, staff shortages all around and just like the problems of healthcare right now. So I would say right now, I am a chaplain who has entered the wild, wild west in the sense that I wanted to see what other innovative tools are out there for me and other practitioners to use in our service, in our care for patients, where the spiritual authority isn't necessarily given or held by the chaplain, but rather the patient or the client has access to their own spiritual authority, their own spiritual knowledge. And that's something that psychedelics has been able to activate. By no means do I think I am a salesperson or an expert in terms of the science behind psychedelics. Right now, I would position myself as somebody who is in the field doing the work, and I'm reporting to you all from the field. So what I've brought here is just like a snapshot of 4 different clients that I've seen, and I'll kind of like lay out what exactly is the way that I see clients and what psychedelic substance I actually work with. So first things first, my way into psychedelics was actually through my own experience of loss and grief. I experienced, I would say, both chronic and complex grief when I lost my father unexpectedly. And my grief kind of felt like a fog that was thick that hovered over me and took hold of my body for years. And there was no way out. And there was no way out both mentally in terms of the practitioners that I was seeing psychotherapeutically, and, just like no way out through the mind. And I found actually psychedelics through, I was at a party in Brooklyn, and somebody had given me like my first taste of mushrooms. I was very spiritually curious. I tried it, and suddenly like I was accessing my emotional body. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. All I knew was that I was accessing another part of me that had stored memory from the past that suddenly was able to become more accessible and was kind of guiding me in the sense of like, I felt as though I knew what I needed. I knew what I felt. I knew what I thought, and I knew what my like higher self was directing from me. And that was a very interesting moment. And that was like a flip of a switch for me. Right now, the work that I do is mostly with ketamine, and that's because it's legal. Do I think ketamine is Jewish? That's another question. I'm not sure, actually. Ketamine is a dissociative. It has been used as an anesthetic, an analgesic, mostly for sedating patients for surgeries when in combat, used in like the Vietnam War to date, and then also like in parties and clubs in the 70s. So there's lots of stigma there too. But in lower doses of ketamine, what we find is that it actually works as a very effective antidepressant. specifically for patients who have suicidal ideation or who are treatment resistant with depression. They've tried multiple SSRIs and have not had any breakthroughs. And so ketamine was kind of like this last stitch fix effort to provide some sort of palliating quality, but more so like almost like a window out through the mind that new cognitive behaviors, new cognitive adaptations were available when using ketamine at a lower dose. That said, I would still say ketamine is really new in the field, and there's a lot of research that is continuing to be done. Questions around, is the substance addictive? Is it addictive physically? Is it addictive emotionally? What are the impacts of ketamine on the body and the body's wear and tear? Do we care about that question when we're treating patients that are already at end of life? And that's, I think, a really good hook to start with when I share my first case study. So maybe we could pick up the slide. Thank you, Samantha. So I wanted to give you all a snapshot of what my life as a practitioner is like when working with patients using ketamine. So always before a session, we talk about what are your intentions when using the ketamine. There's almost this quality of like, you need to do the pre-work, you need to set yourself up, both like in terms of your space, having it uninterrupted, having it calm, knowing that nobody is going to disturb you, distract you, laying out a day where there's no work or, you know, extreme things that you have to do afterwards or tend to, responsibilities. Like you want to clear out a day so that you can have an hour-long experience to surface something that you want to look at or want to work through emotionally or mentally. But it takes pre-work and post-work. So I'm there as a facilitator, as a guide, pre-session, and I sit with the client and I ask them, what are your intentions for this session? And intentions can either look like, what is the question that you want to bring up for yourself and answer to yourself for yourself? So again, spiritual authority from within oneself is what I am trying to both negotiate and prioritize with the client. Another way in with intention setting is, what is the emotion you would like to call in? What is the state of feeling in the body that you would like to call in with this experience, with this ketamine experience? That said, you can set intentions, but that's not necessarily how the session is going to roll out, right? So we set intentions more as an anchor point, so that when a client is lying down, and usually it's with an eye mask, the room is like dimmed, there's some sounds, but none of it have like music that is, I would say, that has words or any specific quality that's going to create an ambiance that's like other than therapeutic. But the question is like, what happens when you're lying there and you're like, nothing's happening, or my mind is getting in the way? So that's where the intention is really great as an anchor. So to jump in with this first client, this was somebody that I saw recently, a 67-year-old woman with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And she came to me as a chaplain who has experience with grief and death, wanting some integration work and some direction while taking ketamine, specifically with the intention of wanting to find bravery in dying. Her intention was to embrace her mortality with a greater consciousness, to face her death and prepare her body to let go. As a chaplain, if I receive that, that's a pretty weighty lift and a weighty ask for somebody who's a practitioner just meeting a patient for the first time, maybe only seeing them twice or 3 times. And that's often what is happening as spiritual care providers in hospital settings, sometimes different though in hospice. So with ketamine, I just wanted to bring up, this is what was able to happen. These are her notes verbatim that I asked and she allowed me to share. And I wanted to just read what her experience was when writing, when journaling 30 minutes after that 1 hour long ketamine journey. So her experience. For what seemed to be like a long time, at least half of the session, it didn't seem like anything was really happening. So I thought to myself, you know, let go of those expectations and try to relax further into it. And so I did. The first thing I started to notice was that certain musical chords really drew me in, and there was a soundtrack playing while she was doing the ketamine session. So certain musical chords really drew me in, and it seemed to pull me and struck me in a visceral kind of way. It felt as if a tide was pulling me into some place, whether into the ocean or something else. I felt a gravitational tug, and I found that very relaxing. Those moments were like a deep breath out, a deep release. And so I allowed myself to listen for those chords to try and help me relax more into the experience. It didn't seem to open me further, and that's when things started to happen for me. At some point, I had an out of the blue sensation related to my intention of finding bravery to leave the planet. I started to see and feel how very brave I am in this moment, that my chastising myself for not being brave enough suddenly felt foolish, that doing this itself, doing the ketamine, is an act of bravery, that I'm trying to expand my consciousness before leaving here is brave, just the act of coming here. She went on and continued that, then I started to see a visualization in my mind. I had the sensation of being a shorebird near the ocean, like a seabird. This is a sort of ineffable, so it's hard to explain it. I kind of was that seagull flying, but I also wasn't. I was either observing it or I wasn't. I wasn't entirely sure, but it felt really close. So it's hard to separate. It just seemed like this bird was so sure and confident with what it was doing. He was just doing what a seagull does. He didn't question it. He didn't wonder whether he was doing it right. It was just reflexive. But somehow he was also so aware of the beauty in it, the beauty in just doing what he was built to do. And he was keenly aware of the perception in that. When journaling, my association with all of this is that the body knows what to do, that there is no bravery needed. I kind of felt the perfection in that. It gave me a real sense of relief, or like a reminder of something that I already knew on some level. There might have been a bit of holding back or a mental resistance on my end, like my mind was constantly aware and trying to make sense of what happened. I felt like the bird whose wing just brushed against the ocean waves. So this was her verbatim. This is what she shared with me. She was going through, usually during a session, I ask, well, what happened? Walk me through it. What happened? And what happened could have been something that was happening on the mental scape. How was the mind reacting? What was the mind doing during that experience? Did you feel blocked? How can we incorporate that into your experience? What was happening on the emotional body? What were the sensations in the body? What were the feelings that you had? So that the chords of the music, the tug, the pull, right? The sensation of feeling relaxed while being tugged. But then I also ask if any memories came up, any visuals. And for some folks, they might have all 4 of those things. And for others, it's just one thing. And it's, I saw colors. And I just relaxed and that was it. So really with each patient, it's so specific. And so what I would ask after the session is, well, how is your body feeling now? So it's really important to kind of just get the client to get back into their body again. Instead of talking about, we want to talk from the experience. And so in this case, she shared that I feel more relaxed. I feel like I got a taste of where I want to go, meaning this exploration around death and about mortality. I feel a little less afraid. There is something about the perfection in it all. In the whole flight scenario, like with the bird, just having had those few moments and my body knows what to do. It felt like a beautiful finality to it all, beauty. It felt like more of an opening, a letting go of resistance versus expecting images and visualizations. If anything, it was more of a body experience for me. So that was just the first client that I want to share with you. And I'm also aware of time. So in this case, this woman brought such a raw and vulnerable question forward. And ultimately, it was a question that I wanted her to be able to answer for herself. And it's an answer that's coming mostly from the body state, actually, which is what she shared, that I can relax into the experience that my body knows how to die. I don't need a direct dying. My body knows how to unravel. just like the seagull knows how to be. And so what I found with all of the clients that I worked with really is just like this immense spiritual intelligence that is internal to them and that is almost like wired based off of their emotional memory, their associations, their religious and spiritual contexts and histories. Nothing to do with me necessarily. What I'm there for is to springboard, to ask questions, to open, and to open further and further and further. Do I have time to share another client case, maybe a short one?
Sure, one more, and then I'll pose a few questions to get the two of you into conversation.
Sounds great. So I'm going to ask just to see the second slide. And this one I'll go a little bit quicker. So another client that came to me was a woman whose daughter committed suicide. Her daughter was 17 years old, and this is a mother who has 7 children. She was also the head of a HR firm and was a community leader. So she had a lot of things going on in her life. The intention that she brought was to learn how to manage my grief so that it doesn't weigh me down completely and pull me under because I have so many responsibilities. She wanted to figure out how to effectively incorporate this tragedy into who she was, but not let it take over her as a mother, because she has to continue. And I just want to give a little image of what this experience was like for her. So she shared, I felt mostly calm and relaxed throughout the experience. I sensed that my daughter, Clara, this is not her real name, I sensed that my daughter Clara's presence was like a persistent drum sound. So again, sensitivity to images and sounds. She offered a bass line in the background. I embraced the sound of the drum, but I looked forward into the horizon in front of me, where the rest of my children were waiting for me. I wept a lot, my mask was drenched, but the grief didn't pull me under. I knew that I could touch it, but that I had to accept that this was the emotion of loss that could not engulf me or pull me under. I have a job as a parent, and so I will cry, but I won't wail. Not right now. I was then brought back to a memory. So again, like buried memories or things that you didn't even think were related to the intention, right? Come up. I was brought back to a memory where Sarah would open her journal every morning with the sentence, "Dear Universe." This was her way of manifesting her dreams into reality. And I remembered that I could do this also. I can write a letter each day to bring more love into the world. And so I could let Sarah know that she is with me. And so this woman, what we ended up working out through the integration was, let's open a journal each morning and write, "Dear Universe." So again, memories from the past, things that are long buried that suddenly become kind of like, that point that can open or provide that relief or even that action that could be taken in order to direct the intention. There's more to say here, but hopefully this snapshot just gives you a sense of resonance of what the work is. Thank you.
Beautiful. I really appreciate your sharing, giving us a window into the realities that you experience in your support of others and their realities in the experience that we can't read about in the few books that we do have access to, in which people have shared. I put a link to the chat earlier to Michael Pollan's book, and we'll share those kinds of resources in our follow-up also. So, so many questions coming in, great questions. I'm gonna see if I can ask a question to engage you, Zac and Mati, together in conversation, very broadly. Our curiosity is why now and how psychedelics are becoming more widely used in supporting end-of-life explorations, experiences. Where are you seeing this happening in the work that you do? Where are you reading about it? How can we learn more?
I'll start and not try to cover everything, and Mati is very entrenched in this, but I would say that an important piece from your question is that we now have more research. There are just more research facilities. There's more data. There are more clinical trials that are happening more than ever. And a notable one is, probably people have seen it on 60 Minutes or maybe aware of it, is with regard to the Johns Hopkins team, same team that I was working with regard to terminal cancer patients and the use of psilocybin for the easing of death anxiety. And so it was shown that not obviously, there's a decrease of death anxiety in people who have terminal cases. And this was such an important landmark study that I think it just created greater awareness, not only for psilocybin itself, but the potential for other substances also. And at the same time, I would say with the rise, because these things are illegal, yet ketamine is a legal substance in the use of psychiatry and under medical supervision, that because people don't have access to these classical psychedelics because of the illicit nature of them currently on a federal level, that people are then going to ketamine clinics, and people who are starting ketamine clinics, and people are going to ketamine clinics. So ketamine seems to be a venue for this that people can take without the desire of breaking the law or going to a country where they are legal. So I see that that's probably a manifestation of research and growing need and the market. But also, I think in this time right now, all of us becoming more acutely aware, if we weren't acutely aware already, about the preciousness of life and the grief that I think we have all been exposed to a traumatic event with the pandemic. That there's more urgency for people to take care of themselves and become more aware of the naturalness of their bodies, like Mati was saying with the seagull, to be able to feel well while they're still alive, to have a good death when it happens.
Monty, anything to add?
I guess like two things that I would just add is, it's really interesting with the COVID-19 public health emergency. What became possible from that point was telehealth. And what also became possible with that moment was, some sort of just capitalizing on the moment to allow ketamine treatment to be available, more accessible to like Americans all over the US. Whether or not that's being done in a responsible way or in the right way, it's almost like they're flying a plane while building it at the same time. And that's something to name, I think, and be aware of. What I'm sensing from the clients that I meet is like a deep mental health crisis in America, a sense of loneliness, disassociation, disconnection from community, a sense of purpose and meaning. It almost feels like there's like a spiritual drought that's being responded to through, consciousness expanding tools that suddenly became really interesting and almost like, just like popular. I think that as a practitioner, I'm wary of it in a way. My sense is that it's a systemic issue at the core, that we have worked ourselves to a grind. We don't know what it means to be in a rhythm with a community, with a season, with a landscape. And so we're trying to find ourselves back to nature. It's almost like we're crawling back to nature. And it's beautiful, but I also see that like, meditation, community, and relationships are probably the soil for our healing. And maybe it's the soil that we're eating that will bring us back to that truth. But as a practitioner, I definitely am more interested in the sobriety of healing, which to me comes down to meditation and relational intimacy. That's the core of trauma. Yeah.
Beautiful. So you've mentioned grief. It's come up in the questions that folks are exploring also. Our initial curiosity was about how psychedelics support facing death while we're on this side of it. Curious if either one of you can speak to others' experiences or knowledge about the use of psychedelics for folks who are in their acute grief experience, carrying heavy burdens of grief with them, complicated grief, prolonged grief, all the new diagnoses that are out there. Psychedelics and grief.
Well, it's certainly a complex topic, and we've spoken about this earlier. I think an important point that Mati and I were able to discuss and uncover when in preparation for this talk is because the psychedelic experience requires time. Right? Mati was saying an hour, maybe 2 hours for ketamine treatment, or for other psychedelics where when people are doing this underground or they're going to retreats in other countries, this is many, many hours of work in an open state of awareness. 6 hours, with LSD, sometimes 10 to 12 hours. And I think also not only the substance where things are allowed to come through, but that emotions that have been repressed or unresolved maybe have the ability to filter up. It also just is about the container of time, that when these emotions are coming up and in, that you have 6 hours finally, right? When do we have time to grieve? Even in our tradition, how long does a Shiva last when you're not schmoozing? Or how long is a good cry if there's something that's really terrible that's happening? But it's about the opportunity to have the emotion that is coming up, to be with it as fully as possible, not to go on to the next thing because there's nothing else to go to. This is what is happening right now. And a good guide or a good therapist or a good shaman would then guide the journeyer to exploring that as fully and deeply as possible. So are we making time, even if we're not talking about psychedelics, are we creating space and time for these things to actually happen and to see the complex weave work of what grief is, other than an opportunity to schmooze and move to the next thing?
Beautiful.
Just to add on that, what I've continuously found interesting is that a lot of the clients that come to me that aren't necessarily coming to me for the sake of, navigating grief, they might bring up an intention of wanting to feel like they have more of a connection to their purpose, wanting to navigate like where their belonging is, wanting to understand their sense of like authority or like, just who they are. And what inadvertently comes up is grief. It's almost like the thing that blocks the movement of energy or the flow of life is grief.
Mm.
And what I also find really fascinating in this work is that, as Jews, we're really good at, navigating the space of Shiva, navigating the space of, memorializing deaths, yard sites, but we don't really talk about the other kinds of griefs, like losing a job. What does that do to your identity? How do you see yourself in the world? Moving to a new place, losing your community, your children like moving out of the house, things like that. And so there are processes that are happening that, again, as Zac was saying, we don't have really time to emotionally process, and nobody's really taught us how to do it either. And it's almost like somebody needs to die in order for you to cry. And that might not be the case. It's like all of life is this act of, living and dying and living and dying and living and dying and practicing dying. And there's these mini deaths that we experience. And I think what psychedelics has been able to at least revolutionize or make space for is the ability to feel, and to feel takes space and time, and not being in the grind and productivity, right? Because there's a sense of like going inward, the motion is inward and out, there's purging. There's no creativity necessarily in that. There's no production in that. And so to get away from the production mindset, to know that what you're doing is useful or valuable or even necessary in order to live or build or move forward or have your life force energy not be blocked. That's a teaching that I think we could use more, probably more elders for and around some, but also like an incorporation into the way that we relate with each other. it's sad to see that, like, people say, I'm sorry that I'm crying during my session. I'm like, why are you sorry that you're crying? What do you think healing is about? Really? Sorry. So that's my.
Mati, it's amazing that you mentioned these mini deaths, and also the time piece, that I'm thinking about Jewish spiritual practice and what are the most normative mainstream places for that. It's usually worship or study or community, but the Jewish mystics had this entire toolbox for various practices for various states of awareness that actually got to have the opportunity to practice these things. And I just want to read from a text that probably, I don't think anyone knows. This person's name is Yehuda Al-Botini. He was from the Tzfat School of Mystics, a student of, or a colleague of Rabbi Chaim Vital. And he writes in one of his books about how one can experience death before dying, right? This is just a practice that he lays out. He says, and it has occurred that one soul may be attached during this divestment, trying to die before dying, totally and entirely, and they will remain dead. And this is an excellent death, close to the kiss of death that is mentioned in the Gemara. And already some of the masters of wisdom who enter into these activities said that whoever does not wish their soul to depart from them, then during the preceding vision, near that activity, they should bind their soul with an oath, or with this great and awesome name, that while they are in this vision and beholding when they are not in their own domain, their soul should not detach and go to adhere to its source, but rather returns to its sheath and to its body as before. And thus they shall do, for it shall not go back on its oath, and then return to the matters of the body and rise up and eat some morsel and drink a bit and smell a pleasant odor and return your spirit to her sheath and rejoice. And then he goes on to say, when you are an expert in choosing this life and repeat this many times until you succeed strongly and firmly, know that the more you persist in this matter, it will be easier for you to accomplish, and you shall acquire a great preparation to see the things that you desire, to see without many fears, as in the beginning. So this death awareness practice, right? Something that one does often enough, that where they're practicing their death, and he talks about holding one's breath and tightening one's body as if, in rigor mortis, and holding one's breath, and then the release, that at the time of dying, that this is not something to be feared, but someone has already felt like what it is like, and then there is just the embrace, this kiss that can happen, versus the anxiety or fear of tossing off this mortal coil.
Beautiful. Zach, there's a request to me directly to share that text. If it's something you can share with us, we'll send it out in the follow-up. And you and I have already spoken about how the next time we get together on some of this stuff, we're going to focus on this wisdom that we don't know enough about, death awareness, mortality practice. I'm going to ask some of the practical questions that are coming up in the chat. One is, there have been some specific questions about interactions with other medications, at what stage they should be used, and in particular, use among the old elderly, folks who are closer to Moses is 120 than perhaps 50. And I'm curious where professionals, Jewish professionals who are doing end-of-life work in various contexts, can go for the kind of psychedelic medicine, medical training to learn the answers to these kinds of questions about interactions and things like that.
I'll give a bit, and then Zach, I'm curious
Please.
also. So first of all, it's important to note that many clients are taking SSRIs while also doing ketamine treatments. So it's not like you have to choose one or the other. They can be concurrent. There's definitely a screening for which patients would be eligible for use of ketamine. And that is to some degree reliant on do you have hypertension in your family? How severe is your depression? blood pressure, all of that kind of stuff, that's something that is screened by a professional. I am not that acting professional. There's always a clinician that's working with me. And I would also say it's all state specific. So if you're a Jewish professional that's seeking education or tools, obviously you can look at trainings at like Naropa or Emory. I know that those are two leading institutions that are providing trainings that are embedded in clinical contexts. I also know that Berkeley as well, and Zach, maybe you have other leads there. There are many, many different trainings that are coming up, and I think it's worth noting that doing your research and asking people who have done it already and seeing how much it costs, all of those things are a valuable part of this experience, but it's also very much state specific. So I wouldn't give generalized information to anybody.
Yeah, that's, I think, great advice. I just to put in a plug, there's someone on the call here, Chaplain Candy Werman. We're going to be speaking at the National Association for Jewish Chaplaincy, Jewish chaplains, about this emerging field of psychedelic chaplaincy and talking about it from a Jewish perspective. The issue right now, I think, in this Wild West, as Mati mentioned, is there's just no good standard for what these trainings actually should be teaching and should be covering. And from my perspective, from the desire to have something that is culturally competent and spiritually and religiously respectful, that Jewish experience is often not a part of these curricula, either knowledge of Jewish traditions with expanded consciousness, but often what happens, what I receive from people who come to Shefa with their experiences in psychedelic states, wherever it was, ketamine or ayahuasca, or with their therapist or by themselves, is that often Jewish trauma, Jewish pain, whether Ashkenazi or Sephardi or Jews of Arab lands, that those kind of complex traumas and identities are not well understood and easy to be held by, I'll just say it, by psychedelic-assisted therapists who are not Jewish, or even by Jews who are not as connected to these things. So I think that there is a lot of room, just like what is happening in the LGBTQ community or in the BIPOC community, that there is a desire for Jewish therapists or Jewish chaplains or Jewish spiritual caregivers to be able to offer this to Jews themselves from a place of really deep empathy and deep knowing about these psycho-spiritual, psycho-emotional issues with Jewish history, that it's a better fit. It's a more round peg in a round hole, I would say.
Nice. I'll add to the resources. One of the folks who brought these topics to my attention as we were getting started introduced me to the University of Pennsylvania's nursing school, has done a fair amount of training accessible online. I've participated in a couple of sessions. It's a good primer for some of this stuff. And also our friend Michael Hebb, the founder of Death Over Dinner, and we've done a number of Death Over Dinner Jewish edition experiences here online with Shomer, has a project called Drugs Over Dinner that he is renewing and is currently gathering groups of practitioners for online sessions in preparation for bringing more of this work to the public. I'll put the website in the chat and you can see, oh, there it is, Samantha, thank you. You can see some of the discussion guides that he's already preparing and putting out into the world. Mati, you spoke early about spiritual authority. Can you help us, we Jewish seekers, to understand what spiritual authority is and how we can claim it in our lives?
What a question. I could speak. I'm going to speak from my spiritual authority here. Growing up within ultra-Orthodoxy, often the authority was outside of me. And that was something to navigate, being being led through, spiritual experiences or religious experiences and rituals where the authority was kind of dictated by the word or by the one who knows the word. And all of that is good and well. And I do believe that we need spiritual teachers, and that, as I was saying, there's a spiritual drought. And so we need spiritual teachers. But there's also a sense of something that I've kind of like turned to within my chaplaincy practice. I mean, I'm trained as a Jewish theologian, a Jewish feminist theologian, but my practice as a practitioner was specifically humanist, which meant I wanted to see everybody. I wanted to be able to baptize a baby if that's what was needed from me. And I have done that. And that might be controversial, but in my spiritual authority in that moment, it was like, that's what's being asked of me in that moment. And so what I try to inspire within the clients and patients that I see is a sense of self-reliancy, but also self-trust and a sense of authority that, like, I don't know your history. I don't know your emotional landscape like you do. I could be an accompanier with you, a chaperone, a guide, but you're the one that's leading the script of your life, you and maybe God, whatever your relationship is with the divine. But if I could be there to enhance the sense of self-agency, self-responsibility, self-direction, and this is where the plants, I think, also really help, of just, like, I am my own, I wouldn't say controversially, I'm my own God. God resides in me. What does it mean to, like, basuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, like, make for me a temple and I will dwell within you. It's feeling your own sense of godliness, that you are a co-creator in that experience. But yeah, when I think about my own movement away from ultra orthodoxy, and this is maybe getting a little too niche, but there's a sense of, like, when we grow, we want to individuate. And individuating is almost like a movement away from authority outside. It's like, I am the one that has the ability to make choices and take the repercussions of those choices and deal with that. But I'm an agent here. And I think that spiritual authority ultimately means that you are the one that's crafting meaning. I'm not giving you meaning. You're crafting the meaning.
Beautiful. Thank you. Someone in the chat likened it to the work of a midwife, where the authoritative knowledge lies within the birthing human. Amazing. I'm going to ask one last question before I offer the closing instructions or remarks. So for folks who are here with a curiosity about how to get started in exploring psychedelics to alleviate fears about death, anxieties about death, or an anticipation that they or someone they know might eventually get a diagnosis that would kick up those fears, how does one get started learning where to go, how to do that kind of stuff? I imagine, you got to start Googling and asking people in your own community. It's very local. There are the legalities. But, within that question, anything we should know as folks go off and do their explorations.
It's really complicated answer. Again, this is for the purpose of education and harm reduction, and people are going to do their own investigations. I want to say probably most important, like, people are going to do the work and find the work that is most important to them. I think I just want to put in a plug here for, if people are actively seeking their own guides or their own therapists who are doing this work, it is very, very important to do very thorough vetting of these people. This is an unregulated industry, and there are no professional guilds or associations where someone's credentials are being checked, or there is a board of ethics and someone could have their license removed. And often then there is no way, God forbid, if there is a guide or a therapist who is acting unethically, to report them. And often what happens is that people who enter into these situations, because they are doing it underground, or this is still working with drugs that are scheduled, is that they feel that if God forbid, there's something bad that happens in these spaces, well, I'm going to self-incriminate. I'm going to say, hi, I broke the law. I did drugs to this person, and then this thing happened. So there's been enough about the problems in the underground space recently that have been in the media, and I just want to give that word of caution to go slowly.
Great. I appreciate the love and care with which you deliver these important lessons, along with the sharing of the wisdom that the two of you have gained through your own work. This has been fabulous and fascinating. And as I said, the beginning of what I imagine will be many conversations we can all engage in together in this forum and others. I want to put a plug out there for our next program. Shomer's next program is focused on ethical wills. Ahead of Passover, thinking about the telling of our collective story of liberation at the Seder, we hope that it might inspire you to think about how you want to tell the story of your own life through the values that animate you, who you are, who you've been, and how you want to be remembered. We will send you a link to register in the follow-up. We'll also be sending the recording along with the follow-up resources, and you can share the recording with anyone and invite them to sign up for our respective mailing lists. Samantha's putting a link in the chat to the evaluation. We get to these fascinating topics and amazing speakers and partners because folks tell us about it and express the need, the interest. So please take a minute to share your thoughts with us, both about how we did today, what we should be doing next, and what more you want to see. We will share that with Zac and Mati as relevant. And I'm really grateful to the two of you for being our teachers and guides in this conversation. It's really been a blessing.
Thank you.
For the
Thanks.
Yeah.
Folks, if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to us at hello@shomercollective.org. hello@shomercollective.org, and we look forward to staying in conversation and relationship, and we'll bring our time to an end today. Thank you so much, Mati and Zac.
Thank you.